Welcome to our September membership meeting. I dearly miss our face-to-face, the dinner meetings we used to have. We're trying to find an opportunity where we can all get together at some point in time, hopefully soon. But having said that, I think we are still continuing on with our agendas and events as planned. So I definitely want you to know that how deeply appreciative I am for all the hard work and dedication this team has put forth in organizing this evening's event and meeting. I'd like to kick off our meeting by welcoming our new members joining the ISM family. And then we'll follow our discussion listening to Dr. Rogers from Colorado University on the exciting topic of supply chain cybersecurity. Before we get started, I'd like to share some details about our upcoming events, which is a seminar and an upcoming webinar in a few weeks. Our September 18th seminar is about leadership, and it is in 2 days. So if you have not registered yet, please do so. And our October 7th topic is about burnout detox. It's a webinar. It's about burnout detox, a healing roadmap for overachievers and leaders. These are really exciting topics. We will have an insightful discussion on these seminars and webinars, upcoming events. So I hope you can all join, and please register with us on ISM New Jersey website. At this point, I'd like to now introduce our membership director, Anu Rao, to welcome our new members. Anu, thank you.
Thank you, Preeti. Before I introduce our newest member, I want to segue from something Preeti said. She talked about using opportunities to meet people, maybe not exactly those words, but with that, I'd like to mention the Women in Leadership conference that's coming up very soon. This time we have a whole new format. It's going to be completely virtual. It's over 3 days, October 1st, October 8th, and October 15th. This is going to be the 12th annual event, and each of those days is just going to be 1.5 hours. So I do encourage everyone who is on the meeting today to attend this event, because it's just 1.5 hours on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks in a row. Also, in case you're not available all 3 days, you do have the option, unlike before, of registering for just one of those days. So truly encourage each one of you. And although it's called a Women in Leadership Conference, would love to see more participation from men too, because as we are talking more about diversity and inclusion across large and medium and small corporations, we need men to be involved in the process too. We are having our very own David Johnson as one of the panelists, and we also have other male procurement leaders who are going to be part of the event. And it's going to be a huge learning experience and an understanding about women in the leadership world. So please do register. I would be delighted to see more ISM members there. With that, let me introduce Christina Paz. She's our newest member this month. Welcome, Christina.
Video, there we go. Hi everyone, I'm Christina Paz. I'm the newest member. I currently work at Daiichi Sankyo as a strategic sourcing manager. I've been there now only 3 months, and yesterday was actually my 3-month anniversary. But prior to that, I worked at DSM North America as a sourcing manager, and pretty much I've been in procurement all my working life. So it's been about 13 years now or so, but yeah, I look forward to joining more meetings, and it's nice meeting you all virtually.
Thank you, Christina, and I hope to see you as well at the Women in Leadership Conference. Thank you very much and welcome
Yes,
aboard.
thank you.
And Jeffrey, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you, Preeti. Welcome, Christina, to ISM New Jersey. Let me introduce our speaker, who everyone can see in their corner, Dr. Zach Rogers. Dr. Rogers is a noted researcher and associate professor of operations and supply chain at Colorado State University. Dr. Rogers is passionate about supply chain security and the role that procurement professionals play in ensuring a secure supply chain. Cyber security is a hot topic and can potentially affect your business. Dr. Rogers' primary research interests also include the financial impact of supply chain sustainability, emerging logistics technologies, as I mentioned, cybersecurity, and other emerging purchasing and logistics issues. Dr. Rogers' work has appeared in academic journals, corporate white papers, trade pubs, and a number of conference proceedings. He earned his BS and MBA from the University of Nevada, Reno, and his PhD in supply management from Arizona State University. Before coming back into academia, Dr. Rogers worked as a purchasing agent for a large hotel resort company as an operations manager for, I never say it right, Quidsi, which is a subsidiary of Amazon. Before I turn it over to Dr. Rogers, let's try to make this interactive. If you have questions, feel free to chat them, put them in the chat bar, and we'll field them as we go along. With that, Dr. Zach Rogers.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thanks everybody else for inviting me to be part of your meeting today. I was telling Jeffrey before we started, you know, especially now with COVID and everything, my classes are too big to teach in person. I've got 90 students in each section, and when I talk to them, all their cameras are off, so I'm just looking at a wall of initials. And when I work on my little research projects, it's just me and like the 3 people I'm writing it with, and you feel a little bit like you're going crazy actually, and yelling into the void. So I'm actually really happy to be able to be here with all of you today, and to actually talk about it, talk about all of this with someone other than myself and the 4 walls around me. So I'm excited about it. So thanks for that really nice introduction. It always seems too long. What I'm here to talk about today is cybersecurity, and the importance specifically of cybersecurity in the supply chain, because that tends to be something that's very overlooked, especially for a lot of the supply folks that I talk to. And a lot of these issues have really been exacerbated by the outbreak of COVID-19. And so just to give you a background of what we're going to talk about, some fellow researchers and I, S.K. Jung and Thomas Choi, who are both at Arizona State. Thomas Choi was one of my professors when I was there, and S.K. is a PhD student now, and actually he's in my old office. So the 3 of us have been going through a lot of sort of publicly announced cyber breaches and breaking them down and figuring out how many came through the supply chain, how many were digital infrastructure, and all kinds of different sort of characteristics. And so today I'll be talking a little bit about the results of that, and also tying it into sort of the larger discussion of what you all as supply managers might think about, you know, trying to deal with cybersecurity. So the first thing I think is important to sort of establish a baseline here. This is the results of a survey that we gave to actually another ISM group. This one was with the Denver group and also Western Washington, so essentially the Seattle area. And we asked them essentially, you know, how important is cybersecurity when you're evaluating new suppliers, and sort of where does it fall? You know, where does it fall on sort of the overall criteria of your supplier scorecards? And so you can see from this first graph here, okay, how much does cybersecurity matter is a selection matrix or a selection metric. Very few said that they strongly agree. We had about a quarter of folks say somewhat agree. 40% say, you know, not really, and then about a quarter say neither agree nor disagree, which I've always I always kind of thought was probably code for, oh gosh, we don't use it, but maybe we should, is kind of what I thought that middle group was. And then, that's sort of corroborated by the next graph over, and we said, so rank the order of importance when you're selecting a vendor. And so, we said rank, 1 through, I think we had six here. So the lower the number is, the more important it is. So obviously not surprising, quality, cost, all that stuff's most important. Cybersecurity, and also cybersecurity of that supplier's network, the extended network, both came in at the lowest possible, the lowest rankings here. None of that surprises me. When I think back to my own days as a purchasing agent, as Jeffrey mentioned, I worked at a big casino. I did purchasing there, and that's mostly because when you graduate and you live in Reno, that's really, your only options are warehouse, casino, mine, and maybe, brothel or something. And I really wasn't cut out for any of them other than casino and warehouse. And so those are the two that I did. And when I worked there, I worked in procurement, and I didn't have cybersecurity on any of my supplier scorecards. It wasn't something, when I looked at my KPIs, it wasn't something that I was really judged on. And so you understand, why supply managers wouldn't really put cybersecurity anywhere near the top of the metrics. Now, obviously, there's some baseline, measures you want to have in there, but if it's not something that's really a priority, it's something that can easily be sort of pushed back. And the reason I think it can be pushed back, and that's not a priority, is because sort of the conventional idea of what cybersecurity looks like is that, here's my firm, the focal firm here's us, and there's, malicious attackers trying to penetrate our firm. And we think about it as sort of a direct line. So, if we're like a house or a castle or whatever, we lock the door and the bad guys are trying to come into the front door, which is a very reasonable way to think about that, right? You have to secure your own door first. And that's why so many of us work at companies where we just got whole floors of people dealing with IT issues, and a not insignificant amount of those, looking at cybersecurity. And it's annoying sometimes, and they keep sending you the updates. Hey, update your computer, update all this stuff. And you let it just sit there and blank until, you get that message where it says, hey, your computer's shutting down in 3 hours because we have to update everything. And then you finally do it. And so because we think about it as, attackers are going to be coming after us directly, we don't necessarily consider the vulnerabilities in our supply network, maybe the ways that we should. And let me walk you through a little example here. And I like this example because it happened in my own real life. And this is kind of why I got interested actually in supplier cybersecurity. So it's Target. So if everyone remembers the Target hack from a few years ago, Target was hacked and they lost the records of 110 million customers. So they lost credit card information. And I was in the lucky 110 million. And I remember when I found out, I was sitting in the living room, and it was when I was still in school. So I was down in Arizona, and I was watching a basketball game. It was like a Friday night, and I never really got a ton of time for like watching basketball games when I was in grad school. And so I was excited. It was like, it was like the Warriors and the Thunder. So it was a good game. I was excited about it. And I remember I was sitting there, and then suddenly my wife steps right in front of the screen, and that's not something that she normally does if everything's good. And I asked her, like, hey, you gonna keep going, or are you gonna stand there? And she said, well, I don't know. Are you gonna tell me why you opened up 2 eHarmony accounts this morning? And I didn't remember opening up any eHarmony accounts that morning, but somebody had gotten my credit card through the attack on Target, and they use it to open up some eHarmony accounts. And I never heard if they ended up finding love or not. I don't know how that went, but they'd stolen it, and eventually I was like, no, this wasn't me, and everything turned out fine. I think I might have caught the fourth quarter of the game, but it really put a damper on the night. And so, you know, kind of on behalf of all of the husbands in America, I thought, I'm going to figure out how this kind of thing happened. And when I looked into it, this was the answer. Target wasn't attacked directly. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Target, you know, huge, you know, Fortune 500 company, one of the biggest retailers in the world. I mean, there must be whole floors of people in Minneapolis trying to make sure they have good cybersecurity. So how possibly could Target lose 110 million customer records? Well, because the attackers didn't attack them directly, they attacked this company, Fazio. Fazio, for those of you who may not have heard of it, is a little company, 125 employees, and they were running the free version of, I think, Norton antivirus. They didn't even have, like, you know, the where you got a spring for the, you know, the $129.99 or whatever for the enterprise software. They didn't go for that. And so they just had the free version. The problem with the free version is it will check for viruses when you tell it to. It doesn't do a continuous check. And so, you know, emails had come in, people had clicked on them, and by clicking on them, they got their login credentials into Target's back office system. That wouldn't be such a big problem, except for Target, in those days, didn't require, you know, any two-stage logins, and they didn't do any sort of defense in depth. So they didn't have any segmentation in the back office system, okay? So basically, once you got in to the Target system, you could go anywhere. And so the attackers actually got into Target's point of sale system, which you might be asking, why would a small HVAC company in West Virginia and Southern Ohio have any need to access Target's point of sale system? The answer is they don't, but Target didn't have any sort of segmentation back there. It ended up costing them $162 million. And I'm guessing that if Target could go back in time, they would have thought, you know, Fazio, we'll spot you the $150 you need to have the good version of Norton antivirus, you know, because in the end, we'll save $160 million. And this is an example of a phenomenon we see over and over again, where, remember on that last slide, we said, okay, what everyone's worried about is malicious attackers kind of going right after, you know, your firm. But the way it works most of the time, and actually more than half of the cyber attacks on large publicly traded US firms look something like this, where, okay, we would like to go get the data that the big company has, because, you know, you're not going to get $160 million out of a small supplier like Fazio. But, you know, they're pretty well protected. And so we have to go in sort of through the supplier. And so if we can breach the supplier, maybe we can breach the company we really want to breach. And let's go back to that house analogy. The way that a lot of companies think about it is, attackers are going to try to get into our company. We need to lock the door. We need to lock the front door so they can't get in. And maybe that door is strong and you can't get in without a key. The problem is, every supplier that you have, every vendor that you have, you know, allow access to your back office system or some sort of interface for ordering or inventory management or whatever it is, you have to give them a key. And so it's not about, is the door to our house protected and strong enough? It's about, are all of these suppliers who are giving keys to also protected and strong enough to protect what's inside? Because, you know, if someone with a key gets hacked, well, now I can open that door up and I'm inside your house. And for Target, they didn't have doors between all the rooms. And so these attackers got in using the Fazio login, went all over the place, went everywhere. I'm not picking on Target. I'm using them because they didn't manage my financial information well. But digging into the data over the last 6 or 7 years, you see it's happening everywhere. And this is just some of the highlights here. There's a whole bunch of other firms that we could put on here. But, you know, you got Equifax, which is one of the biggest hacks of all time. That was through sort of subcontractor. American Airlines got hit through their ticket vendor. Walmart and Costco and CVS, that was all actually part of the same hack. Their photo development company was the one that got breached there. Washington Post and News Corp both got hit. You know, when you're reading like an article, and I think CNN was in this one too. You know, you're reading a CNN article and you scroll down to the bottom and And so there's like the real articles, like, oh, do you want to know about this, thing about the election or fires or whatever? Then you scroll down and there's like the weird articles where it's like, you'll never believe how much weight like Honey Boo Boo's mom lost or whatever, and it's through some weird website. And then you say, well, I do want to see that, and you click on it. Those sort of advertised articles, a hacker had actually been posing as a website that bought, basically they're the broker between these extra articles down here, and then something like CNN or Fox News, which is News Corp. And they eventually, after they kind of had their trust, they made it so anyone who clicked on that got a whole bunch of viruses and stuff. And so they hit Fox News and the Washington Post in the same one, and I think that does show that disagree with the attackers as much as you want. At least they're bipartisan in the way they try to bring people down. So if we look at how this has changed over time, so our data really goes from 2011 to 2020, but sort of the 2020 stuff, we're focused more on COVID here. So I'll just show you the numbers for how it changed from 2011 to 2017. In 2011, 27% of the sort of publicly reported cyber attacks, and again, these would be successful cyber attacks. So we're not looking at the stuff where they caught it and nothing happened, because there's millions of those every day. Successful cyber attacks, 27% in 2011 were sort of through the supply network. So through someone who has a key to your house. In 2017, that number was all the way up to 61%. Today, it's still in the high 50s. Companies have actually gotten a little better about this. Really low 50s. Low 50s is pretty much where it's been in 2020. But it's still half or slightly more than half of the cyber attacks happen because of the supply base. And generally, these attacks are so prevalent because they're kind of easy to do. If you think about, and sort of IS sort of literature and sort of professional evaluations of cyber attacks, you can sort of divide attacks up into how skilled are the attackers. Is it high skill or low skill? High skill is like really complex and interesting stuff, maybe some ransomware. Low skill is like we're just sending out phishing emails. And then high focus or low focus. High focus attacks tend to be almost political attacks, like, oh, we're taking down, the PlayStation server to prove a point, or we're defacing the Iranian government websites to prove a point. Those are sort of the high focus attacks in our sample. Low focus is just like, we're sending this out to 1 million different people or companies, and we hope people click on it. And if we just get one, that'll be successful. And sort of these high skill, low focus attacks, that's where most of the supply chain attacks come from, because it is generally fairly sophisticated actors. They know what they're doing. They're not just copying and pasting malicious code for the most part. But they sort of attack the entire supply chain. And the reason you attack the entire supply chain is because you don't know where the attack is going to be successful or not. And so you can sort of think about hacker strategies as almost having like a shotgun type approach, okay? So imagine this chain here is our supply chain. And the supply chain holds customer information, operational information, maybe manufacturing blueprints, things like this, financial data, both firm financial data, customer financial data, all kinds of stuff. And increasingly, we see more of this data being held in the supply chain and not at the focal firm. We have a lot more sort of digital infrastructure suppliers in more recent times, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And so you're really trusting your supply chain with more data than ever before. And that's fine if your supply chain is strong, but it really only takes sort of one weak point in the supply chain, and that's because hackers use something called the shotgun approach. If you think about a shotgun, and I've never shot a shotgun. I don't particularly want to get ducks or whatever it is you do with it, but I understand how they work. And if you think about a shotgun, you don't shoot just one bullet, right? You shoot sort of a spread, and you hope that if the bird was over here somewhere, maybe I'll hit it or whatever. And that's kind of what hackers do. And so hackers, when they attack a supply chain, especially of a company like Target, it's easy to sort of see who target suppliers are. All the big ones have to be reported in their annual report. You just ping all these different suppliers. And your hope is that, we fire 1,000 shots and just one of them breaks through. And so if they hit, this weak link in your supply chain, break through, then now they have access to all this financial information, demographic info, whatever it is they're trying to get, corporate espionage, whatever's going on. That, by the way, that little cartoon, that took me like 20 minutes to make. And I think it was money. It was time well spent. I'm proud of that. And so basically the issue here is that it's very difficult to protect the whole network, because again, it only takes one weak point in the chain for the whole thing to sort of fall apart on us. And it's not just attacks on first-tier suppliers. So Fazio to Target, that's a first-tier supplier. Target can make moves, can take action to make sure Fazio changes their behavior. It's not always the case when the attacks come from further up in the supply chain. And we see a number of cases where there's actually a tier 2 or tier 3 supplier, maybe a contractor that the focal firm, the target firm, doesn't even know about. And you have attackers going through a couple levels of stuff. This happened last year. I don't know if probably people saw this Bloomberg cover, and it was called The Big Hack, and someone's holding this little diode on the tip of their finger, and so this little chip was inserted by attackers somewhere into big servers. And so it was, I think it was Supermicro was sort of the tier 1 supplier, and Supermicro provides servers to companies like Amazon or Apple. Okay, so a lot of AWS servers are built by Supermicro. Well, Supermicro used to build everything in Oakland. Obviously, they don't now. It's too expensive, and so a lot of it's done in China. And Supermicro had suppliers, and then that supplier had a subcontractor for a sub-component assembly. And so this component assembly, allegedly, and of course everybody denied this, but right after this happened, Apple pulled half of their new servers for no reason. They just said, oh, we're pulling them because we don't like them anymore. They just spent a ton of money on it. So it seems like something did happen, and then they didn't want to freak everybody out. And so what happened is, allegedly, hackers, possibly from the Chinese, People's Liberation Army, possibly some malicious group, but the story in Bloomberg was that it was the PLA, got hired as sort of line workers in the subcontractor in China, and was putting in these little chips here, these tiny chips that fit on the point of your finger. And these chips were genius because they looked exactly like 5 other chips that were in the assembly. So it wouldn't look that off. It has 6 instead of 5. Plus, these chips are actually underneath. They're in between 2 sort of circuit boards. And so you can't even see them unless you pop the circuit board off. And essentially what this chip did was it would send a message into the server that, hey, any password you put in to access the server is good with the server. And so essentially, it opened up all these servers, maybe to the Chinese People's Liberation Army, maybe to somebody else. All these servers are being used for AWS and for Apple Cloud stuff. And Apple immediately had to pull all these servers, and it cost them a lot of money. But if you think about it from this perspective, though, how on earth could Apple and Amazon actually check that? How could they really be sure that every subcontractor on the other side of the world doesn't have malicious actors in there who are gluing little chips that look like they should be part of subsystem of a server? It's really, really difficult. Now you can try to sort of legislate it through incentives. Let's go to the first tier supplier, have them sort of monitor second tier suppliers, and there can be some success there. But I like this story because it really shows the sort of depth of vulnerabilities, of cyber vulnerabilities that a lot of firms have inside of their supply chains. Okay, So I want to talk now about how COVID has really sort of changed hacker strategies and all this kind of stuff. But before we do, are there any questions from anybody up to this point, up to where we are now, before we sort of extend this out?
Zach, somebody asked, and I was waiting for a break, will you be able to share the slide deck with us?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. Yeah. Anything else about any of this? Or do we want to just keep going here?
Anyone? Okay, let's keep going.
All right, great. Okay, so COVID, the outbreak of COVID has really sort of changed the complexion of some of these attacks, and also exacerbated the frequency of these attacks, and in some extent the success rate in a number of ways. This, by the way, is an example of this kind of thing. This is a sample attack somebody sent out where it says, hey, if you see this message, it's because your computer has been affected by the coronavirus. Now, generally, your computers aren't going to get hit really with a respiratory illness. I don't think they're that vulnerable to it. But this is sort of an example of the sort of hacker tendency to sort of just any iron that's hot, you strike it, basically. Any place we see an opening, we're going to go for it, and we're going to try to penetrate some systems using any weakness we can find, using any vulnerability we see. And really what COVID has taught us as we've gone through this is that for the attackers, it's all about, the path of least resistance, the way to get in to the data you want, the financial information you want, by doing the least work possible, essentially. And so to sort of check how COVID has changed this, my co-authors and I went through a few thousand publicly disclosed attacks from November 2019 to May 2020. And actually now we have the June and July data that we have a couple grad students and one of our other co-authors analyzing now. And so more data is sort of rolling in as we go through this. But this is through May. And I also want to point out, okay, here we say there's thousands. Obviously, there's millions of attempted attacks between these time periods. These are just attacks generally that were on, publicly traded firms for the most part. Not all these firms are publicly traded, but quite a few are. Mostly in the US, and that were actually successful and reported by the press. There's plenty of attacks that we know we missed. One, because they weren't successful, or two, they were successful and the company didn't really disclose it or talk about it. Maybe they handled it quickly internally. So these are like attacks that were in the press, okay? And basically, what we see as we go through this is that attacker patterns really shifted as COVID sort of happened. And you can see we sort of these dashed lines here are sort of means for the total number of attacks on a weekly basis. And you can see in the months leading up to COVID, this mean, the number of successful cyber attacks, it's quite a bit lower than it was on a weekly basis later on. Now, this started to sort of dip and come back to pre-COVID levels lately, and we're going to kind of walk through why that is. And a lot of it is because basically what we see is a wave, right? Attackers figure out some tactic, they use it, and then the victim firms sort of adjust, and that tactic stops working, and then a new tactic is sort of launched. And we're going to sort of walk through how COVID-19 has sort of changed the way attackers are going after the supply chain, and specifically sort of firm data. And really, I think it requires in some ways a shift in the way we think. We a lot of times think about supply chains as physical things, but really what the COVID attacks have really kind of unveiled here is that it's a very digital supply chain. It's a very information-based supply chain. I mean, it's really what we're moving around, opening up new vulnerabilities, new attack lanes, and covering back up. It's all about the information network. And the information network in some ways has become the focus. even more than the actual supply network. And let's talk about it. So the first sort of wave that we saw as we were going through the COVID style attacks, or COVID era attacks rather, is attacks on firms that would maybe be weakened or more vulnerable because of COVID attacks. And so if you think about these dashed lines here, right, these are sort of, these firms becoming more porous. Right when COVID happened, there was an increase of attacks on vulnerable institutions. And so this is a graph of attacks on sort of hospitals. And you can see right at the beginning, there's this big spike in attacks on hospitals and other medical centers, partially because, and here's a article backing up, they've significantly increased. And it was because, well, hospitals are really stressed out now. Now this was, and you folks in New Jersey certainly had it, it was more intense there than it was out west where I am in the early months of COVID. I've got a couple colleagues at Rutgers and then a few in the city, New York City area as well. And it was just, it was crazy there. The hospitals were so overwhelmed. And when these hospitals were overwhelmed, attackers actually switched from focusing on suppliers to really going at hospitals themselves, because they thought, oh, they're going to be stressed out and maybe a little more vulnerable. Well, hospitals quickly figured that out, and you can see how quickly that trend sort of dipped off. We also saw a lot of COVID-themed attacks. So, we showed that picture at the beginning, which is like your computer has the coronavirus, which again, I don't know who that could have possibly worked on, but they instead started targeting companies that were hurt by the coronavirus in different ways. So hospitals were hurt because they were so busy. Other companies were hurt because they weren't busy at all. And so they actually used fake emails that looked like the U.S. government PPP grant stuff. And so they sent out, hey, we know you're a small business, fill out this form, give us your information so we can send you money. And there's all these companies that are just desperate because, maybe it's a small restaurant or an apparel store, and, apparel fell off by 90% in April and May. Furniture, electronics, everybody was hurting. And you get an email that says, hey, click here to fill out your loan stuff. And some of the loan stuff didn't come out super smoothly anyway, especially in the beginning, it was difficult. And so people were desperate. And so we see all these attacks and it really spikes, here kind of April, May-ish. Really, this is probably late, mid-April is where it really spikes. And we get all these attacks on people who are sort of desperate. So that was sort of the first wave. So remember, we looked at the sort of growth trend of attacks during COVID. So the first wave is we're just going to go after the really desperate folks. And if you have these kind of companies in your supply chain, and a lot of larger companies would, because again, these are all small firms. Just like Fazio was easier to get into than Target because they were small and didn't have really sophisticated measures of defense. All of these small firms that got attacked early in the pandemic are also these small, very vulnerable firms that act as suppliers to a lot of larger companies. And so we see a little uptick in the number of attacks on suppliers sort of in this part of the pandemic. Okay. After this, after some of these firms have kind of figured out, okay, these are fake emails and stuff like that, and hospitals really hardened quickly. It's actually really impressive how quickly they hardened their defenses. Attackers turned towards another group that was newly vulnerable because of the pandemic, and that was people working at home. And so again, think about your information supply network, all the folks that manage your information, both outside of the company, inside of the company. Well, normally, people managing data inside the company are within the sort of walls, within the protection of that company's cyber defense. If you look at this little picture we made here, you can see there's the solid lines, that box around all the employees working inside the company. They're on the ERP, they're protected by whatever the company's cyber defense is. If I'm at Colorado State University on their networks, there's phishing emails that I never even get, right? They're turned away by the network. I don't even have to worry about stuff like that. You're inside a much little, stronger sort of thing. I'm on their routers, on their Wi-Fi, all that stuff. Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone had to go home. I mean, as I was looking here, just when everybody had their video on a minute ago, it didn't seem like anyone was sitting inside an office building. Maybe some folks are, but a lot of us are just sitting, you know, in a room in our house right now because we weren't able to, you know, maybe there's limits on how many people can go to work. Think about how that changed defense and sort of the protections that you had in terms of the people managing your data. So before, yeah, suppliers were outside of that sort of box, right? But suddenly employees are outside of that box too. If I'm at home and I'm just working on, you know, my own sort of router, I mean, the router we have at our house is probably 4 years old. I mean, it's probably time to buy a new router, honestly. But it's probably 4 years old. Maybe I'm connecting through Citrix or Palo Alto. Those also started to be targeted. And so basically what happened is all these employees who are suddenly outside of the protection of their firms. And again, this is true for both, you know, for focal firms and supplier firms. Suddenly all these employees are sitting outside of this wall of protection, became much more vulnerable. And we see a big uptick in the number of attacks on people working from home. And here's a little graph sort of showing that. Here we go. Where's our little graph here? There it is. Look at that. Look at the way it spiked. And I think the WHO declared it a pandemic in, oh, that says pandemic, doesn't it? You know, someone asked if I'm going to share the slides. I'm going to share the slides. I'm going to fix the spelling of pandemic, though, before I send it to you guys. And so there's a big spike, and you can kind of see this spike happened after the attacks on hospitals. Remember the attacks on hospitals, attacks on small firms, that really happened early. Then that sort of went away. That became less prevalent, and attackers shifted to attacking folks at home. And in a lot of these attacks were possible. You can sort of see these bullets here. A lot of them came through out-of-date VPNs or old networks, and 60% were through, took advantage of unpatched hardware. So essentially, you know, maybe you have a router, or you have, you know, your network or your computer or whatever, and there's updates that you could do, but you don't do it. And yeah, it's hard to do it. I mean, you know, I frequently have, I don't know, 50 tabs open and a bunch of documents and emails that are half written and all kinds of stuff sitting on my computer. And I don't want to close it to restart and do an update because I'm busy, because I got stuff to do. And I'm always slow to do it. Other people are too. And the problem with being slow to do it is you have, you know, the patches are there for a reason. The patches are there because, like, hey, this is a defense that you need now because there's an attack. And so vulnerabilities that wouldn't have existed if people within the firm and within the network were working inside their companies on corporate computers, the corporate network, corporate routers, suddenly those attacks work because people are sitting at home using unpatched routers, old computers, all kinds of stuff like that. You know, there was Cisco issues on routers all over the country, people stealing WebEx credentials. So, you know, if people were signing in through WebEx or whatever on any other kind of virtual desktop, these credentials are being stolen all over the place because you don't have you don't have the defense. And so attackers shifted here. And again, we see attackers really following the vulnerability, and we think about how our information networks are structured. Suddenly we had these new pieces. We had people at home that we never have had before. And when you get a new piece in the network, that is oftentimes the most vulnerable piece of the network. I mean, you almost think about it like nature. As different parts of an ecosystem begin to emerge, those new pieces of an ecosystem or new pieces of a herd or something, right? The baby gazelle or whatever, that's the most vulnerable one. The newest pieces tend to be the most vulnerable. And we've had all this network expansion. And all this expansion, because of COVID, because we needed to stay productive, has led to increased vulnerability and sort of a larger vulnerability landscape. So people did start to figure this out. And you can see the attacks on individuals really starts to drop off. in like May. And so what happened then? Well, so firms, for the most part, tried to move. One, they started telling employees, hey, here's how you update stuff. Maybe more computers and routers got sent home. In some cases, we saw firms, hey, use this router now, or investing in things like Citrix or WebEx or some sort of VPN where you're no longer just relying on the sort of hardware of the folks working at home. Well, what this did was put more stress on infrastructure. You can see in this picture here, the firm had to connect to everybody working at home through an increased use of digital infrastructure. So, I mean, how many of us on this call were normally on 4 Zoom calls every day, 5 days a week before the pandemic? I'm guessing very few of us. Now, it's probably all of us. And it's not just Zoom, it's, Microsoft Teams and Google Hangout things and Skype and whatever other weird, chat things that people are using all over the place now. And also, increased router use and Palo Alto and all kinds of VPNs and things like that. We're using them way more. And so basically what happened is we suddenly had way more traffic going on all of this infrastructure. And infrastructure became very, very overtaxed. And there's some headlines from earlier, a lot of, for instance, the Google Play store, the Android sort of app store could no longer handle the amount of attacks being thrown at it. And because everyone was using phones and networks so much, suddenly there's a whole bunch of malicious stuff that just got put on there. And it was tough for them to manage. You saw all the stuff with Zoom where people were doing Zoom bombs and all kinds of weird stuff like that. Because Zoom suddenly had way more stress on it than the infrastructure could handle. And I know that you guys in New Jersey know all about this, about infrastructure and what happens when it gets overtaxed. My parents lived in Edison for 4 years, and I remember going to visit them and having to go back to the Newark airport at like 6 o'clock on like a Tuesday afternoon, and the drive from Edison to Newark was not quick. And it made me think, the infrastructure here really wasn't built for this many people to live here. And when that happens, when infrastructure gets overtaxed, it fails. It's the same thing for digital infrastructure. Our digital infrastructure that we use to connect employees working at home, supply network members to the focal firm, all kinds of stuff, suddenly had way too much stress on it. And when it had way too much stress on it, it became more vulnerable. Plus, suddenly much more valuable information was going through all of this stuff. So it'd be like, the whatever it is, the I-95 or whatever was really not built for as many people who live on the East Coast now. And then also all the trucks are full of money suddenly, basically. That would sort of be the equivalent. It's much more valuable stuff going through the infrastructure and a lot more vulnerability in the infrastructure itself. And you can see our sort of counts here. We had way more stuff, way more attacks on sort of software vulnerabilities. And again, there's only a small slice of it. These numbers have actually gone up slightly since this happened. And look at this. When all this sort of COVID-related stuff sort of drop off, suddenly the attacks on suppliers spiked back up again. And so in many ways, it kind of came full circle where most attacks are directed at suppliers pre-COVID. COVID happens, companies become vulnerable, and all these vulnerable companies, sort of harden up. They realize, hey, we're being attacked for hospitals. Also, hospitals got less stressed out over time as we were able to sort of, flatten the curve. And then we go to a bunch of attacks on individuals working at home. Companies sort of figure that out. And then we move to attacks on infrastructure, this digital infrastructure. And now we've sort of come full circle and mostly we're looking at supplier networks again. And all of this has really shown that attackers always take the path of least resistance. So as supply managers, we have to understand where the real weaknesses of our firms are and the weaknesses of our supply networks are. And then you sort of have to move in, and this is, you know, done through auditing, contracting, all types of things. And then you have to move in and address those weaknesses. And the issue here is that the weaknesses tend to be flipped from the normal sort of cyber or sort of the normal sort of supplier hierarchy. I bet if we ask the folks on the call, what are the suppliers that matter the most? And you think about sort of an A, B, C characterization of suppliers. Your A suppliers are your most important ones, and then C suppliers are, you know, maybe commodities. Small suppliers doesn't matter that much. Well, of course, all of you spend more time on your A suppliers. I know when I was in procurement, I certainly spent much more time with A-level suppliers than it was C-level suppliers. The problem is the C-level suppliers tend to be the most vulnerable because those are the smallest ones. And they tend to have, you know, bad digital infrastructure. They might not have good employee training. They might have folks working on unpatched routers and all kinds of stuff. And so you sort of have to protect yourself as a company from all these C-level supplier vulnerabilities. And we're going to talk about how to do that in 1 second.
Zach, so
yeah,
let me just jump in because James asked a bit ago and I wanted to wait till the right time. What standards should suppliers adhere to reduce cyber risk attacks?
So there's quite a few things. And, you know, let me just, let me get to the next slide and then we actually will address that exact thing.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the last sort of piece here that we see is a lot of credentials have been stolen, and a lot of machines right now we actually think have been hacked but not actually activated. And so there might be bugs inside of routers and phones and computers, basically any sort of object that's a smart object that's connected to the internet. And we've even seen these in the past with things like fish tanks and LED lights and home security cameras, anything that's connected anywhere. A lot of these have had bugs dropped in them over the last 6 months, and the bugs haven't been activated yet. Now, it's unlikely that anybody's going to hack into your fish tank or your LED lights because there's not much that they can get out of value there. They can be used, however, for something called the DDoS or distributed denial of service attack, and all of the sort of data we've gone through, and also, you know, other folks like Brian Krebs, who really is one of the leading sort of cybersecurity experts in the world, all are kind of thinking it's almost like these hackers have been gathering all this ammunition during the COVID attacks because they've been breaking into smart objects to sort of, you know, penetrate companies and supplier firms. That's what I was thinking of. But there's a lot of stuff that they haven't used yet. So they sort of have their hooks in and haven't pulled the trigger yet. And what that probably looks like is something called distributed denial of service attack, where basically you take a bunch of different smart objects and use it to send requests at a server. And we saw this a few years ago with DIN. DIN is that company that, you know, when you type in a URL and you type in, you know, New York Times, you know, .com. And if it's the first time you've gone there, you don't have cookies on your machine, you say New York Times, and then suddenly you see a flash where it's like 1 million, you know, letters and numbers in front of you, and then it goes to New York Times. DIN is the company that translates the real address with all the letters and numbers that are crazy to, you know, nytimes.com. That's what DIN does. And so attackers took DIN down last, I guess 2 years ago now, with a bunch of objects, and basically they were sending them 5 million requests a second, which almost nobody can handle 5 million requests a second. And it knocked out, you know, Twitter and Facebook and CNN and a whole bunch of other companies that day. And it was a really big issue. And it looks like right now attackers have more ammunition for that than they've ever had before. And it's funny, they're kind of Amazon Web Services is like the white whale for a lot of these guys. And they've tried to take down AWS 3 or 4 times that have been publicly reported. And they haven't been able to do it yet. But that's sort of what people think might be coming is the big push towards knocking down AWS, which obviously is a huge problem because AWS is the server supplier for so many different people. I know Colorado State, we use Amazon Web Services for all of our online stuff. And if that went down right now, I mean, like I said, all my classes are online. I've got 180 students online. if that went down at the right time, like during a midterm or something, I mean, that could just be such a pain, honestly. And you know, if they get in and get the data off it for other companies, that would obviously be huge. Okay, so let's go to the final thought slide, and hopefully this will address Jane's question here. So first off, I think it's clear that, you know, we had sort of a lot of trends that we were tracking. So again, we've been looking at this since data since 2011, and we had a lot of trends towards vulnerabilities outside of the firm. And really COVID, like with many things, has sort of sped up that process. Supply network security has gotten more important. And especially as information networks have expanded to include people at home, more infrastructure. I mean, if you think about a supply network as nodes and links, we have more nodes and links now than we did before COVID. And a lot of these nodes and links are unprotected by pre-existing systems, both for you know, sort of the focal firms, as well as all throughout their supply network, these nodes and links have opened up. And we've really seen that it's more difficult to sort of make sure that you know, digital vendors and digital security, remote security is, up. You know, companies really weren't prepared to ding over, you know, WeChat or, you know, whatever it was that was going on. The other thing I think we see is that adaptation is really, really important. You know, attackers change tactics quickly. I think firms need to change quickly as well. All right, so what are some of the action items we can take away? And this goes to that question, I think. So first is, there has to be policies in place, and they have to be communicated with suppliers. So, hey, here's our policies, first tier suppliers. Here are the policies we'd like you to use with second tier suppliers. Here's what the sort of carrots and sticks look like there. Also, and this is really important, there needs to be mechanisms in place inside the company that prevent breaches from really spreading. And so you can almost think about this as like a seatbelt. Well, obviously, none of us would like to ever need our seatbelt, right? We hope that we're never in a fender bender or anything like that. But if we are, the seatbelt really mitigates the impact of getting in an accident. And firms can do this by setting up something called defense in depth and really having good supplier evaluation of all of the people in your supply chain, or maybe even, you know, in your own firm working from home or whatever. So if we think about that analogy of the house and the Fazio example we had right at the beginning. Fazio was not just the heating and ventilation air conditioning supplier for Target in sort of the Appalachian region of the country. They were also the supplier for Walmart, Costco, Super Value. But Walmart was a lot better about managing access, about the mechanisms, the seatbelt, than Target was. So Target, if you had the key to their front door, to the Target house, if you had the key to their front door, they could go anywhere in the house. Now think about that. If you were letting someone into your house, if you were letting a plumber, or how about, you know, like electrician, whatever it is, if you're letting a plumber into your house to fix the sink in your kitchen, does that plumber have any reason to like go into your office and hang out for an hour, or go upstairs to your bedroom or your kids' room where they're doing their homework or anything like that? No. They're here for a specific thing. They should only be by the sink, right? That's the same way suppliers need to be treated inside back office systems. And there it really comes down to two things. One, having a door now between every room in your house. So, okay, I can get in the front door, but I need a different key to get in the kitchen. I need a different key to go to the basement or the office, or the bedroom, or any of that stuff. I need multiple keys. And so if you just steal one, like they did with Fazio, who and Target had, single access everywhere, they could go anywhere. And so you don't want that, right? And so you have to have the locks in place, but then also you have to properly evaluate every supplier and understand what their role is in the company and say, okay, these suppliers need to go in the kitchen, these suppliers need to go here, here, here. What suppliers need access to point of sale system? What suppliers need access to warehouse management system or inventory system or any of these things? And then you give them that specific access and you stop. And that's really a lot of where the role of procurement comes in here, is in properly categorizing all of these suppliers. We talked a minute ago about how C-level suppliers are where most of the threats come from. Obviously, you know, you can do things with A-level suppliers. Hey, we're gonna have a third-party audit. We're gonna, you know, hire a cybersecurity firm to do an attack on an A-level supplier and see what their vulnerabilities are. That's good and well with a supplier who's a huge piece of your spend. With a little supplier, it doesn't really make that much sense to do that. The cost benefit isn't there. You don't have possibly even time to do that. And so what you do with these little C suppliers, who tend to be the ones who are the most vulnerable and most likely to lead to breaches, you make sure right in the beginning that procurement is working there with some sort of cross-functional team, you know, whoever the end users are, and we put them exactly in the box that they need to go in. We give them access to only the smallest possible piece of our company they need access to. And then we can evaluate that going forward if they become more important. But what that does is, even if there is an accident, even if there is a breach, there's a seatbelt there. There's doors locked all over the place. So even if they steal that supplier's key, they get in your front door, they can't go in any other rooms. You're protecting the data that you have all over the rest of the house. Just to sort of underline how important this is, let's go back to that first example with Walmart or with Target and Fazio. So, like we said, Fazio was a supplier to both Walmart and Target. Target didn't use this defense in depth. They didn't categorize suppliers by where they needed to be allowed to go in the back office system. Fazio got breached. Target lost the information of 110 million customers and $162 million. This same exact company got breached, also a supplier at Walmart. Well, Walmart required, you know, multiple accesses and had very segmented back office system. Target lost 110 million customers, 162 million bucks. Walmart lost the information of 0 customers and $0. Okay, and so this sort of shows how even a step as simple as let's properly categorize and evaluate all the suppliers, figure out their cyber vulnerabilities, and then give them the access that they need instead of, you know, whatever access like Target did, which is a little lazy, honestly. You can save yourself $162 million, which I'm sure everybody here would like to do. So with that, we're kind of at the end of the main deck of slides here. You can see, by the way, if you're interested in reading a little more about this, I wrote an article in Harvard Business Review with Thomas Choi in 2018, and also I have a book chapter about this in I think the Oxford Handbook of Supply Chain Management or something that just came out about a month ago. And if anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to direct them that way. I don't get any money if you read it, so this isn't me doing any sales. This is just if you want more information. There you go. So, what questions or comments or anything do we have here?
So, Zach, first, thank you for a presentation that I'm sure you could go on for another hour, given the creativity of the bad actors and the need for us to
Absolutely.
be vigilant. A lot of thank you notes in the chat bar.
Oh, great.
But I know that we're not a shy group, so you know, now's our chance to throw some stuff up. So, Kathy, is there a way to open up the audio to everybody, or are they limited only to the Q&A or chat bar?
They are limited to the question and answer or the chat bar.
Okay,
All right,
so
well, let me. I think I need to stop sharing my screen in order to see the chat. Oh, wait, maybe there it is. I think I just found it. Okay, it was kind of hidden here. Okay, I've got it here. So the first one was from James. What standards should suppliers adhere to reduce cyber attack risk? James, did I answer that question for you when I went through that last slide, or do you want to talk more here? Okay, great, good. It's answer James's question. Anything else here?
Yeah, so before we thank Zach and send them back into, you got snow out in Fort Collins?
We did last week, yeah. So actually, it's funny. It was on Sunday, the Sunday before Memorial Day, it was 98, and then on Tuesday, the day after Memorial Day, the high was 35, and we got an inch of snow. So the winter comes quick in Colorado. We just kind of skipped fall this year and got right into it. And now it's nice again now. It's going to be 80 or so today. Although we do have quite a bit of smoke in the sky from all the fires going on. So it's honestly, it's one of the best parts about Colorado is you never have to put your winter clothes away. You never have to put your summer clothes away because it's really a new month every day of the week. So
Yep.
it's kind of nice.
So Dr. Zach Rogers from Colorado State University in Fort Collins, thank you so much for your time today. We'll get a copy of the corrected slide deck on pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
We will send that out to all of the participants. You'll receive your CEU credits as well. And stay tuned for more up and coming information series. Thank you all and have a great day.